Namaste and Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen. 75 years of our independence. How many of us have at least thought once in our life so far, why did this nation get partitioned? Why was this India and Pakistan? Why did we have partition? Did our founding fathers really want our nation to be split? Because it didn't split, Bharat didn't split into two, it split into three. Because India and Pakistan, and then Pakistan was East and West Pakistan, became Pakistan and Bangladesh. How much has it hurt us? Has it drawn wedges and fissures so deep that they will never be covered? It's important to go back and understand. And one of the ways you can understand is by reading this. Partition Freedom. Author is Ram Madhav ji. And Ram Madhav ji has, we're all voracious readers. He's a voracious writer. He's become author. He's joining us now on the right word. Ram Madhav ji, namaste. Thank you very much. Sir, आप इतना, thank you. Namaste and thank you very much. आप इतना स्पीड से बुक्स कैसे लिख लेते हैं? मैं स्पीड से बुक्स पढ़ नहीं पाता हूँ, आप स्पीड से बुक लिख लेते हैं.
No, that's not true. I wrote this book after a gap of 1 year. My last book was in 2021 and this came out just recently in 2022.
What's the thought process behind the book?
We are in the year, as you rightly pointed out, year of 75th year of our independence. We call it Amrit Varsh, Amrit Mahotsav. While celebrating the 75 years of our independence, which is a great cherished moment for all of us, we must remember one dark chapter of our independence movement, namely the partition of India. Not to blame anybody, nor to hate anybody, but to draw proper lessons from that important historic event of our independence movement. As you also mentioned, country is like mother for us. We call it motherland.
Correct.
Partitioning of our own mother is not something that any son or any child would appreciate, would accept. Nobody accepted it also at that time. Most of the Indian leaders were against it also. Except Jinnah, there was nobody demanding partition of India. Yet India was divided. So 70 years after, should we simply ignore it, forget it, okay, whatever happened had happened and forget about it, or remember it? So that two things will happen if you remember it. Number one, of course, you draw lessons from it. Those lessons should empower you to ensure that there is no another partition of this country again. Number one. Number two, we must remember India's partition was not just the partition of lands, it was also the partition of hearts. So partition of hearts also needs to be ended while we dream for not allowing another partition to happen or ending the partition at one point in the future.
You will have to vivisect me before you vivisect Bharat. This is something which Gandhiji had said. It was his position, wasn't it? But Gandhiji, Sardar Patel, they were all Subhash Bose, name whoever you name, Savarkar, everybody was alive when this country was being divided. You also state in this that when the British tried to partition Bengal, such was the vehement opposition that they revoked it. In 1911 they revoked it, if I remember correctly. So if they could, there was so much of opposition over partitioning Bengal, why wasn't there a collective conscience that came out and said, don't break this motherland? It's a question that you ask.
You see, my book is about those two partitions. The first partition was effected by the British in 1905. The idea was that divide the largest province of India, namely Bengal, which had 80 million people at that time, 8 crore people used to live in that province, into a Hindu and Muslim Bengal, so that Indian independence movement could be weakened. Hindus and Muslims, they put them against each other, movement could be weakened. But that partition was not accepted by the country. In fact, the Britishers wrote that we thought that the Bengali would be unhappy because we were dividing Bengal. So Bengali would react, but the whole country reacted. Lala Lajpat Rai, Bala Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, 3 leaders led that movement. In history, we read that movement as Vande Mataram movement, Lal Bal Pal. And the result of that movement was after 60 years, King George V had to rush to India to declare the annulment of Bengal's partition. The popular movement across the country had forced the British to take back what Curzon called in 1904 as a settled fact. We could unsettle that partition, mischievous partition plan of the British forward by 35 years. The whole country was being partitioned. Why could we not stand up as a country, whole country? Why did it not stand up? 1905 also leaders were opposed to it. 1947 also leaders were opposed to it. You mentioned about Gandhi's statement. Yes, Gandhi did say that in 1940 when Jinnah got that resolution passed in Muslim League conference in Lahore that India should be partitioned and Pakistan should be created. Gandhi said, on my dead body. Vivisect me before vivisecting this India. In front of his own eyes, country was divided. Nehru called it a fantastic nonsense. Pagalon ki baat hai. Nehru was the signatory to partition of India.
Correct.
Who was a pagal, one had to think. Sardar Patel said, talwar se talwar bhidegi, we will fight to the last man, but we shall not let the country be divided. Mute witness. Subhash Babu was not there at that time, but Rajendra Babu was there, many others were there. So my book talks about that story. What happened in those 35 years? That 35 years back, you could prevent the partition of one province. 35 years later, whole country was divided. You were a helpless, mute witness to it. Just accepted it.
I have not come to that part in this book, I'll be honest, but I'm going to hazard a guess based on my limited understanding. Did the number of riots between Hindus and Muslims between 1915 and 1940 change the whole story on ground within society?
You see, there was only one party that was demanding partition of India, that was Muslim League. Now, Muslim League earlier was ready to work with Congress because Congress was ready to make a lot of compromises. So on those basis of those compromises, Muslim League was ready to work with Congress until 1930s. But after Jinnah returned in 1935, it was clear that Jinnah would settle for nothing short of partition of India. But remember, Jinnah did not have the popular support even in Muslim provinces of India. There were 4 Muslim provinces. In 1937, when first provincial elections were held, not even a single province supported Jinnah. Everywhere he was defeated. He was so heartbroken. 1945, the second election happened. In that election also, in no single province did Muslim League have full majority. In one province, it had simple just majority. In another, it had to get support from others. But in 2 big provinces, namely, Northwest Frontier province and Bengal, Muslim League did not have popular support. What does it indicate? What did it indicate? Even Muslims of India at that time fully were not behind Jinnah. But what happened was, Jinnah decided that no more constitutional means. If we try to elections popular support, I will never get my Pakistan, so go for direct action. He then launched massive violence across the country in 1946. That was when the Indian society failed to stand up, Indian leaders failed to stand up. In fact, Jawaharlal Nehru, after 10, 12 years after India's independence, in one interview confesses that yes, we could have stood up, but we became too old and too tired of this fellow, Jinnah, that we decided we can no longer tolerate this fellow, better to give his part to him.
No, but how can one fellow decide that a country can be partitioned, Ram Madhavji, unless that there was, you take the example of Northwest Frontier Province and Bengal, but most of the idea of or the seeds of partition were sown in Uttar Pradesh, Aligarh Muslim University, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, and most of the people who voted were in all the other riyasats of India. The Muslim League did win nearly 400 plus seats in the Constituent Assembly, and they won it across the length and breadth of the country. So was there perhaps a group which was spread across the rest of Bharat, not in the Muslim dominated regions, which wanted to break away, or which agreed with Jinnah?
That was the travesty of India's partition, you know. Those who supported partition remained in India. Those who did not want partition became Pakistan. You know, for example, I gave you the example of Northwest Frontier Province. My book deals at length about it. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan always stood by Gandhi. He used to be called Frontier Gandhi. And he always supported Congress.
Correct.
But Congress finally, without consulting him, while he was the leader of NWFP, elected leader of NWFP, his brother, They were not consulted. That province was given away to Jinnah. He comes back to Congress session in Delhi in July 1947 and sobs, cries on the dais. Uncontrollably, he sobs. So uncontrollable that Gandhi had to get up, go, hold him in his, embrace him and take him away from the mic. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan says, who will trust Congress anymore?
Correct.
We trusted you, now you threw us to the wolves. So those who did not want became Pakistan.
Pakistan.
Those who probably supported could not go from here to Pakistan.
Correct.
Because it involved leaving everything behind and going to another country. So it was a very, very tragic, it's actually a travesty, which is a reality. I discussed those aspects also in this book. See, partition story, just as it's about two partitions, it's also about two leaders, you must remember. One was Jinnah, the other was Gandhi.
Gandhi.
They're not two equals. Gandhi was a much taller leader than Jinnah. But it was these two people whose politics or whose actions had finally resulted in the partition.
Was it also because the British decided to give the narrative in the hands of those who they thought were more amenable or controllable? Although ahimsa and this kind of politics was not what won our freedom. You talk about the fact that there were disparate struggles and there were huge other influences too, which Clement Attlee also has mentioned.
That is true. British were the foreign colonizers of our country. Why should we expect that they would be very benevolent to us? They had their own plans, they had their own machinations. They wanted freedom movement to be weak. They did everything possible to weaken India's unity. It was they who tried to give Muslims separate electorates. It was they who tried to win away Maharajas in the round table.
Yeah.
They didn't just call Congress and Muslim League. They also called Maharajas as a separate group. They also, of course, tried to separate the scheduled castes from the rest of the Indian society. So British did their best to create fissures in our society. But my point is, what were we doing?
What were we doing?
How were we responding? There, I think, of course, history has no ifs and buts, but still I would say we had faltered at many places. I discussed those faltered periods in my book. You are right. The last phase of the freedom movement was the most tragic phase, especially between 1940 or 41, 42 to 47. After 40s, Gandhi realizes that his whole effort of pleasing the Muslim League was not working. Then he says, let Hindu-Muslim unity wait. Let my country remain united.
Right. He said that. He
He
did
says,
say. He did say.
I can wait for this Hindu-Muslim fight to end at a later stage, but let my country remain united. But it was too late because the price we paid already was too heavy.
Yeah, and he also said this kind of freedom is going to come back to hurt us in the future.
Yeah, of course. He said that you are not solving the problem. You are creating a bigger problem by creating two countries in this country. That's why when partition was finally accepted by the Congress Working Committee, it was through Gandhi's persuasion. Otherwise, people were ready to pounce on Nehru and Patel,
Right.
the Congress leaders. Gandhi intervenes and pacifies them, says our leaders were mature leaders, senior leaders. They had spent their whole life in this moment. Let us accept what the decision they took. You are right. It was taken by 2-3 senior leaders.
Yes.
Then Gandhi convinces them. After he convinced them, when he climbed down the dais, one of his followers comes to him and says, Gandhiji, what a great day it is. Finally, through our Ahimsa movement, we have defeated the colonizers, the colonial British. Gandhi replies, yes, we defeated the colonizers, but we also defeated the general.
General.
Meaning himself.
Himself.
I am also defeated because I never wanted India to be partitioned. So it's a very, very poignant story.
True.
That's why I said my intention was not to blame it on somebody. Okay, many people blame Gandhi for it. Gandhi had his responsibility, but so were others.
So were others. Absolutely. And are we split beyond the fact or torn in our hearts that perhaps we are looking at an impending partition, or is there still time for repair to ensure that whatever Bharat remains akhand? Well, that you've got to read the book to find out. I'm going to leave it just there. Madhavji, thank you very much for your time. Always a pleasure speaking with you.